everyone, from wherever you may be listening, and welcome to the AR1 podcast with Brian Carroccio. This is a pilot podcast which we are recording on November 23rd, 2013. During the show today, we're going to cover a number of topics. One thing we're going to do in the next segment, we're going to have an interview with John Lingle. John, of course, is a contributor at morefrontwing.com. He also has a book coming out about Lloyd Ruby, which is ready for pre-order, I believe, now, and will ship by Christmas. We will be interviewing John. John also is, for those of you who don't know, an expert on the IndyCar ladder system, okay, and very knowledgeable about the Mazda Road to Indy. So he will be sharing our insights with us in the next segment. Another thing we're going to talk about, we're going to have a breakdown of the silly season, probably coming up in the third segment. We're, of course, in this segment here in just a couple minutes, we're going to talk about the retirement of Dario Franchitti. And we're even going to have a talk about electronic cigarettes and their connection to the world of IndyCar racing. That will be either in the third or fourth segment. Let's get started here with, I think, the biggest news of the offseason, and that's the retirement of Dario Franchitti. Obviously, with the horrific accident in Houston, everyone is thankful that that Dario's injuries, were not worse. Apparently, if the reports are to be believed, and I mean, there's no reason why they wouldn't be, is that the lingering effects of the concussion have been, in other words, he has not progressed far enough, and the doctors are concerned. Of course, Dario, I believe, has had 2 or 3 concussions in the past. Not that he's an old man by any stretch, but he is 40 now, and the risks are higher. He's more susceptible to further concussions, which means he's more susceptible to long-term damage, so on and so forth. And as he sort of said in his release, he really had no choice but to retire. Now, and Dario's retirement, I think, brings up a myriad of topics. One of which I covered two of which I covered on AR1. One is that who's going to fill the seat. We'll get to that maybe a little bit later. The second is, I think, Dario's place in IndyCar history. Now, I wrote an article that was published Thursday, and basically I argued that I think the greatest testament to Dario, if you really go through the numbers and you really sort of look at the career, is there's no weakness. There's no hole in the resume. For example, when you're talking about sort of the all-time IndyCar greats, Dario, I believe, he's in a tie for 8th on the all-time list. I think it's 8th. Yeah, it's 8th on the all-time list with Paul Tracy and Sebastian Bourdais at 31 wins. He has 3 Indianapolis 500 victories and the 4 IndyCar Series championships. I think the greatest sort of testament to him, that at least that I found, was that he had no weaknesses. He won on ovals, he won on road courses, he won on street courses, he won on banked ovals, he won on flat ovals, he won on concrete ovals, he won on paved ovals, he won on airport circuits. In fact, I've mentioned in the article that there was no track Franchitti visited more than 3 times where he didn't podium. In other words, the guy was good everywhere. Now, when you're talking about sort of the greats, I guess, one thing you can do is, when compared to sort of other greats, you can kind of poke holes in the resume, if you will. And again, might be being kind of nitpicky or whatever, but I don't know. Al Unser Jr., 34 career wins, only had 7 poles. Right there, again, I'm not disparaging Unser Jr. He's an all-time IndyCar great, but he wasn't a great qualifier. Dario had 35 poles. Dario was a great qualifier. Paul Tracy, who I'm quite fond of, both in the car and, Paul as a personality. I think the sport misses Paul, but take Paul Tracy, for example, never won on a super speedway. Okay, so there are all these things again that you can kind of, like I said, you can poke holes in things, um, but there's nothing that you can really point at to Dario. In other words, I feel like I looked pretty closely, but I can't find a weakness. That's the main thing. So I have that in a further breakdown in the column on AR1. So check that out if you get a chance. But if there's a table of the all-time greats in IndyCar, if there's the dinner table, and if it's 10 people, 12 people. I mean, Dario is there, no questions asked. I mean, there's no way you could have that without him, in a sense. So excellent career, more than for number of reasons, and he'll move on to the next phase. Hopefully, I think he'd be great in the television booth. Lord knows the ABC television booth for IndyCar needs something. I mean, I don't know. Heck, Tim, you'd be good. You'd be better in there than some of the clowns they have. But nevertheless, whatever he does, we wish him luck with. There's also been some developments in terms of the silly season. First off, Sebastian Bourdais. We knew he was going to drive for KVSH Racing. However, the sponsor was announced this week, which is Mystic Electronic Cigarettes. Okay, they were named the co-primary sponsor of the KVSH Racing for 2014 and 2015. Okay, that they will sponsor the number 11 machine. This is interesting, and I'm going to go on about this a little bit more in a later segment. These electronic cigarette companies sponsoring Indy cars, this has some real potential in terms of a revenue stream for the sport. Of course, the flip side is the electronic cigarette companies are going to be, let's say, tied up sort of in political and legal sort of debate and litigation going forward, and we're gonna cover that in a later segment. Now, another thing I want to get to is another sort of silly season domino was completed when Mikael Alation signed with Schmidt-Peterson Motorsports. No number was announced, no sponsor was announced. Mikael Alation is supported by SMP Motorsports, not to be confused with SPM Motorsports, Schmidt-Peterson, SMP Motorsports. There's a difference. And he will be driving the number 55. We don't know if he'll be driving the number 55. He'll be driving the car vacated by Tristan Vautier. Now, this is interesting because Mikael Alation is. Had you heard about Mikael Alation, Tim, until 30 seconds ago?
Nope.
No? Okay. Mikael Alation is not exactly what you'd call a household name here in the United States of America. And IndyCar fans who are concerned about the sort of the status of the sport and the position of the sport in the, commercially and such, aren't necessarily getting on board with Mikael Alation. And, I mean, let's face it, Mikael Alation is not going to, Milwaukee or Pocono are not going to be a sellout because of Mikael Alation. Now, I have nothing against Mikael Alation in any way, shape, or form. But his signing was not sort of celebrated, generally speaking, because he's a guy no one's ever heard of. And don't get me wrong, he's had some success in Europe, but he's not a guy that people have really heard of. He's not a guy who's going to, immediately sell a ton of tickets. Let's put it to put it mildly. Now, what happens in these type of situations, I find, is people sort of take out their frustration at the situation. The situation is that Mikael Alation, who is for all intents and purposes incredibly well funded, okay, comes in and gets a seat, okay, and in the minds of IndyCar fans, basically appears out of nowhere. He just kind of appears out of thin air over somebody who is in the mind of fans more deserving, okay, more worthy, more marketable, so, who they have an investment in already. This would be, I don't know, J.R. Hildebrand or Alex Tagliani or Connor Daly or Oriol Servia or any number of people who have more of an established track record amongst IndyCar fans. And, Mikel Elation shows up with a pile of dough. Boom, he's in the number 55. And people get mad at Mikel Elation. They say he's a wanker ride buyer, that he's no good, and that they get mad at Sam Schmidt, who they say Sam Schmidt's just taking a big check. And there's an element of that to it, in that Sam Schmidt has a shop to keep open. He has employees to pay. There's a financial reality. So I understand that. But I think what I'm trying to say here is that fans and many people misplace their frustration. In other words, I wouldn't necessarily get mad at Sam Schmidt for doing something to keep his team in business. And Sam Schmidt lost a major sponsor a month ago. He lost Hewlett-Packard, okay, who was a rather prominent sponsor, okay. Sam Schmidt's trying to keep a shop open. Sam Schmidt's trying to continue to make a living as an IndyCar owner rather than go work a real job, okay. I mean, and who can blame Sam Schmidt for that? People will take things out on Mikel Elation. They don't know Mikel Elation. I don't know him. If he was standing in the middle of Times Square with a shirt that said Mikel Elation, I would not know who he was, and I am a guy who is paid to write columns about IndyCar. Okay, so people will take it out on them, but again, that's misplaced anger. The simple truth is, and I wrote an article about this, there are not the incentives in place for owners to go out and hire the best driver available. The incentives that the owners have, because of the leaders circle, okay, and because of the lousy purse-to-purse races, the incentive the owners have is to keep the shop doors open, okay? You know who helps keep the shop doors open? I don't know, let's see. Mikel Elation helps keep the shop doors open, all right? And under the current situation, in other words, there are not financial incentives for Sam Schmidt to go out and find a young American grassroots guy, a driver with loads of talent and a legion of support, okay, and bring him all through the ladder and develop him as an IndyCar driver and get him to the top level. Because let's say that were to happen. Let's just go and say that not Sam Schmidt, but any owner. Some owner was to go out and find a talented, good-looking, charismatic, just awesome young American driver and was to fund them all the way through USF 2000, Pro Mazda, Indy Lights, then IndyCar. Okay? And then that young man goes off and wins a race. They win the race at Barber. The purse is $35,000. Like, what's the financial payoff? There isn't any. And who's going to get behind this individual for when there are 200,000 people watching on television? I mean, Anheuser-Busch isn't going to get behind this individual. They're going to go sponsor NASCAR and the NFL, and because you know what, 20 million people watching an NFL football game. It's so. In other words, I get the frustration. It's this vicious cycle that a guy like a Mikel Elation, however talented he is, he's not going to sort of, he's probably not going to move the needle. This isn't going to make, CNN, and it's not going to make SportsCenter such that he signed with Sam Schmidt Motorsports. Okay, but something has to change about the system that incentivizes owners to act in a way that is better for the sport overall. That's what has to be addressed, okay? Mikel Elation is not worthy of our scorn. Sam Schmidt, not really worthy of our scorn either. Something about the system is broken, where that Sam Schmidt